Decay and decomposition is a nasty business. There's not much that's pretty about a body wasting away. However, every now and again, a body escapes these facts of death and ends up looking so good that you'd think it could spring to life at any moment. Photography can be an amazing thing, the ability for a photo to capture a moment and let us look back on it forever. Post-mortem photography grew in popularity throughout the 19th and 20th century and was considered to be a natural way to aid families during their time of grief. After the death of a loved one, families would request an image of the dead relative as a keepsake. The mortality rate in children was incredibly high, leaving parents with little to remember. Since death commonly took place in the home, families who could afford it would commission photographers to take images of the deceased in a natural position, either lying down or sitting up. The corpse would be suitably dressed, and depending on the time of death, photographers would have to draw in the pupil in order to give a lifelike appearance. Living relatives would occasionally stay beside the corpse in images. It was common to have mothers hidden behind their deceased toddlers as a way to hold them up during the lengthy photo shoots. The trend in post-mortem photography died down once cameras became more affordable. Prior to then, preserving the memory of a human life was only a snapshot away. Seen as an important man in history, his body remains frozen in time. Vladimir Lenin was a Russian politician, political theorist, and the founder of Russian communism during his time in office. After the execution of his brother in 1887, Vladimir gained an interest in politics and built his way into becoming a chairman for the Soviet Union in 1922. Vladimir became the primary source behind Leninism, a communist worldview, and has been regarded as the greatest revolutionary leader and thinker of the 20th century. Between 1922 and 1923, Vladimir's health took a turn for the worst. After suffering 3 strokes, he had no choice but to step down from politics and passed away on January 21st, 1924. Embalmers were able to successfully preserve Vladimir's body and continue to maintain his youthful appearance 91 years after his death. The body of Vladimir continues to be an attraction to tourists and can be viewed in the Lenin Mausoleum in Red Square, Moscow. While religious sacrifices were once a common thing, finding bodies so well intact, not so much. On March 16, 1999, Dr. Johann Reinhardt and his archaeological team were on the lookout for Inca sacrifice sites in Chile, South America. Just 3 days after their exploration, the team discovered the grave sites of 3 young children who had been used as spiritual sacrifices in the past. A careful examination concluded that each child had been preserved for nearly 500 years. The oldest, known as the Maiden, contained traces of bacterial infection in her lungs. The second child, dubbed the Lightning Girl, was approximately 6 years of age when she was forced as a sacrifice. Lightning had struck part of her face and her shoulder after her death. The boy, called El Nino, had been tightly wrapped and had appeared to have died from the stress of a dislocated pelvis and ribs. Blood and vomit were found on him, appearing that his final moments were not peaceful. With all internal organs intact, examiners concluded that each child was drugged with cocoa leaves and maize beer, causing each of them to die in their sleep. All 3 children are currently on display in the Museum of High Altitude Archaeology in Argentina. For some, human remains are a sacred thing, but that's not for everyone. Eva Peron was born on July 8, 1948 in Argentina. Wanting to pursue a career on stage, Eva moved to Buenos Aires, where she began living her dream as an actress on stage and film. After marrying Colonel Juan Perón in 1944, her husband was elected as president 2 years later. From 1946 to 1952, Eva moved away from acting and pursued her newfound passion in politics. It was at this time where she began supporting awareness to labor rights and women's suffrage. Her time in office resulted in many citizens honoring what she stood for and saw her as a form of strength and guidance in the country. Unfortunately, Eva lost her battle to cervical cancer and died at the age of 33 in 1952. Shortly after her death, a doctor was approached to embalm Eva's body so she could be viewed by all for years to come. As a skilled embalmer, the doctor was able to give the corpse a lifelike appearance, almost making it seem as if she was asleep rather than deceased. Her husband desired public viewings of his wife's body. However, due to military dictatorship, the body was stolen and hidden in Milan, Italy for 16 years until recovered in 1971. With significant damage done to her face and feet, it was decided that Eva's body would be buried to rest. Her body has now been laid to rest with her family in Buenos Aires. Though she was doubted for her belief, she knew exactly what she had to do in life. Bernadette Soubiros was born on January 7, 1844 in France. As a young adolescent, Bernadette went on to experience a total of 18 visions, of which she reported to be the Virgin Mary. Many in her town doubted her until she was able to turn citizens into believers with her teachings. Realizing she was completely devoted to her religion, Bernadette became a nun, taking the name Sister Marie Bernard. During one vision, she was told to build a chapel beside a grotto in her town. Bernadette spent the remainder of her life avoiding attention at all costs and turned to helping the poor, as well as assisting in an infirmary. After suffering from tuberculosis, Bernadette passed away in 1979 and was declared a saint in 1933. 30 years after her death in 1925, her body was exhumed and found to be very well preserved and intact. A wax covering has since been placed over her skin to hide any discoloration. Her body is currently visible in a shrine in France. Archaeologists consider the Tollund Man to be one of the best preserved humans in existence. On May 6, 1950, two brothers were in the middle of cutting peat from a peat bog in Denmark. With the assistance of one of their wives, they discovered the remains of a man underneath a layer of peat. Concerned with their find, police were called 2 days later after the workers believed they had discovered the fresh remains of a murder victim. Baffled with the time of death, investigators turned to Professor P.V. Glob, a skilled archaeologist who suggested that the well-preserved body had been in the exact spot of peat for nearly 2,000 years. The Tollund Man had an astonishing amount of detail left on every inch of his body. Wearing nothing but a skin cap on his head and a hide belt around his waist, the Tollund Man had visible facial hair and wrinkles, indicating that the location of his burial was perfect for keeping him intact. An autopsy in 1950 concluded that the Tollund Man died between 375 and 210 BC from a sacrificial hanging. Examiners in 1950 were only able to successfully preserve the Tollund Man's head. His head and replicated body are currently on display at the Silkeborg Museum in Denmark. Exploration can result in great rewards, but usually requires tremendous risk. John Torrington was a 20-year-old Royal Navy stoker who took an interest in exploring the seas. Adventurous as he was, John became a member of Sir John Franklin's final expedition in order to discover the Northwest Passage. On May 19, 1845, the expedition commenced. It would take the crew an estimated 3 years to reach their destination. However, after losing contact with people on land in July of that same year, it seemed as if their journey had been cut short. A search party was sent out in 1850 and 3 graves had been discovered. It would be 126 years later when the graves were rediscovered on Beechey Island in Canada in 1976. Anthropologist Owen Beatty was able to open the coffins and conduct an autopsy in 1984 after carefully thawing out each coffin. Owen was able to determine that John had died from pneumonia and lead poisoning from the cans of food that they had taken aboard the ship. The 2 remaining crew members were also shown to have died from lead poisoning. The 3 grave markers are still placed as a memory to the 3 that died at sea. Climbing Mount Everest is considered one of the greatest challenges you could ever accomplish in your entire life, and there's a very good reason for it. George Herbert Mallory was an intelligent man that had always had a passion to explore. He earned a teaching degree and began teaching in 1910 until joining the Royal Garrison Artillery as a lieutenant in 1916. On a constant move, George went on to join the Everest expedition with his climbing partner, Andrew Irvine. Climbing mountains throughout Europe and Asia, the two wanted to face Mount Everest. However, due to his age, George believed that climbing Mount Everest would be his last trip, as his body would not be able to endure the harsh environment. On June 4, 1924, George attempted to climb Mount Everest a second time after aborting his initial expedition. With success, Andrew and George climbed for a total of 4 days, making it up to 26,000 feet. On June 8th, expedition colleague Noel Odell continuously observed Andrew and George until losing sight of both of them. He eventually discovered an oxygen cylinder. Concern grew as both had failed to return back to camp. On June 9th, George and Andrew were declared dead. It would take 75 years and multiple search teams before Conrad Anker, a climber, would discover George's body in 1999. Weather conditions on the mountain preserved George's body despite the years after his death. Climbers were able to find the axe belonging to Andrew. However, no one has been able to find his remains since the incident. No one is entirely sure what happened or if the two ever reached the top of Mount Everest at all. It still lies a mystery today. Meditation is not only a healthy practice, but a staple in the lives of some cultures. Luang Pho was a Thai Buddhist monk who, like most Buddhist monks, was disciplined in his beliefs, especially when cultivating his being through meditation. At 79 years old in 1973, Luang took to lotus position to yet again enter a state of deep meditation like he had so many times before. It's unknown as to whether or not Luang knew that this would be his final time, but it was just that. Luang passed away while he was in a deep meditative state and his body mummified. His condition is seen as remarkable, so much so that it's kept on display in a temple in Thailand. With sunglasses, an addition fellow monks believed would keep his form from scaring children, Luang looks quite well for his age and very likely will for a long, long time. The tragic loss of a daughter resulted in one of the best preserved bodies of all time. Rosalia Lombardo was born in the city of Palermo, Italy on December 13, 1918. Rosalia was adored by her father, official Mario Lombardo. Unfortunately, due to the lack of proper medical treatments at the time, the mortality rate in children was substantially high. Just a week prior to her second birthday, Rosalia passed away from pneumonia on December 6, 1920. Incredibly torn and unable to confront circumstances, Mario approached one of the best embalmers he could find. That man was Alfredo Salafia. Using his best resources, Alfredo conducted a thorough embalmment by injecting formalin into Rosalia's corpse, preventing any bacteria from decomposing her body. Other components were added to keep the body from over-drying. The chemicals used gave Rosalia the appearance of a doll-like child. Rosalia's body was laid to rest inside the chapel of the Capuchin catacombs. This would make her one of the final corpses to be admitted into the catacombs. For 95 years, Rosalia's body has been on display and has become a popular attraction for tourists and citizens alike. Medical examiners were able to conduct X-ray scans, and to their surprise, it was easily noticeable that all internal organs lacked any sign of decomposition. In order to preserve the remains, Rosalia's body was transported to a dry room where she was sealed inside a glass enclosure filled with nitrogen. She continues to be adored by many to this day. That's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like to learn more creepy and bizarre things about the world we live in, please be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next Wednesday.